Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Rixson E ML19 in a 605 finish. This happens to be a left hand. This client ordered one of each hand, so this video will serve as evidence for both hands, really, and in different finishes for that matter as well. So let's take it out of the box and take a closer look at it. So this is an ML19, except that it's an E ML19, which means it's a power transfer hinge. Pardon me, a power transfer pivot. And this specifically is a 4-wire version. Okay, so they've got the wires tied together here. That's what our pivot looks like. A very large piece of solid brass, each component is. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you're not going to get this unit with wires less than 4. 4 would be the minimum. People sometimes say, well, yeah, I only need 2 wires. No, that's true. You probably do. It's just the factory won't make it with less than 4 wires. And that's just because in case one wire gets damaged anywhere, you'll be able to have a backup set. Or what people will do is they'll tie a pair of them together so that they can kind of run more amperage through the system by tying the wires together. So this is a left-hand pivot. There's no doubt about that. So when the door is here, it would appear to you to be a right-hand reverse. To me now, but to you now a left hand. Intermediate pivots are used in the center of the opening. When you have a door, you're going to have a pivot at the top, a pivot at the bottom, at the ground, basically, and then generally an intermediate pivot. The intermediate pivot not only keeps the door in the rabbet, will also, in some instances, help carry the load. Not an ML19 isn't a load-bearing pivot, especially when it's been modified to be an electrified version. So it doesn't really do the job of carrying any of the load, but it transfers the power, obviously, and it also will help keep that door from any sort of bow or giddy-up that it might develop, thermal bow, things of that nature. Is really where you're going to see that. It's a heavy piece of equipment, weighs about 2.2 pounds, and I don't know if these leaves can be separated. I'm incredibly convinced the answer is they can never be separated, and removing that threaded hex cap that's down there, clearly that's capped together, and I'm not going to separate those at all, because obviously there's wiring that has to run through there, which is why they must have that limited, which is certainly why they have that limited. So this is going to include fasteners. I ordered this material as to include standard fasteners, so they'll give us all machine and all wood screws, and there's plenty of both of those in order to get the job done in that regard. Installation instructions are included here with the document, and we're going to go over that as well. Used to be once upon a time there were no installation instructions. It was just the template. That's all. And quite honestly, that's all you needed. But now they've come with some plain language on the document as well. So let's take a closer look at the supporting documentation. And before we switch to the screen view, let's just put the tape measure on the leaves themselves. And generally I find 5 inch, that is indeed correct. Then the overall width, about 1.25 inches on what would be the frame leaf. 1.25 inches, indeed. Yeah, well, both leaves are 1.25 inches at the bottom, or at the thinnest portion, where they don't interact the knuckle portion here. Also, before we move to that, this is a 3/4 inch offset pivot. That means it's just simply defined as from the face of the door, when this is installed per the template, from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting, maybe better shown this way, from the face of the door, which will be my hand, to the vertical axis of pivoting, it's 3/4 inch. Okay, that's important to know because that is your point around which the door is going to rotate, so that you can work to determine if that will give you an adequate amount of clearance. Basically, when that door goes from closed to 90 degree, your door will be obviously setting out here, but when it goes to 180 degree, is there enough room between here and here for you to be able to open the door past 90 should you need to? So that's important to know that it is a 3/4 inch offset. So let's now switch to the screen view and take a closer look at the supporting documentation. Okay, so this is the item that we are here looking at, and not much to see here except let's take a look at the supporting documentation down below. The first that we have here is the cut sheet, and this is what we're looking at here. What's important to know about this intermediate pivot is what it's used for and where, more importantly, you don't use it. This is the E ML19. It's handed, and you have to specify the quantity of wires. So it's offset hung as we described earlier, and there's that 3/4 inch dimension I talked about. 3/4 inch from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting center line. 3/4 inch. Okay. It also is almost 3/4 inch from the edge of the door to that same dimension as well. It could be if you had a 1/16 of an inch there, but it's probably going to be slightly less than that. It is handed, as I said. It's non-load bearing, so don't use this in an application where you're carrying more weight than the pivot set can handle. Door and jamb portion are factory assembled and cannot be separated. We wondered about that initially. Always use the M19 pivot to install door. What I'm going to go with that meaning is that since you can't separate these leaves, you might find it a challenge to get your door hung. If you have the leaves separated, you're going to need that door hanging, and you're going to need to have that pivot prep ready to go and the pivot attached. 4, 6, 8, or 12 wires, depending on what reporting you have to do on the door. Cylinder, electric dogging, electric latch retraction, electrified trim, electric lock, electric strikes, recs, request to exit, monitoring. All of these things will add up. Door contact switches maybe as well, wherever you're using it. You can also order this with electrolinks, and that is basically just a quick connector. It's a way to quickly assemble your wires together. They're just connectors. I would always prefer to have quick connectors rather than having to tie off the wires and then use a wire nut. 24 gauge wire, which is what this has here, is rated at 2 amps for low voltage. If you need to go with a large inrush capability, you are probably going to want to consider thicker wire, which would be the U version, the EM19U. That's going to give you 18 gauge wires on 2 of them. So you'll use that where your hardware is requiring that you have 18 gauge wire versus 24 gauge wire. And like I said earlier, many people will just tie off the pairs and let the current flow through it that way. I don't see a reason not to do that. 3/4 inch offset. You have to have your door edges beveled to use these because that's the way the hinge has been manufactured. The hinge has been put together in such a way that it requires that relief or that bevel on the edge. The pivot's not been built based on its geometry to be on a square edge door. That's important to know, that your door edges have to be beveled. Furnished with wood and machine screws. You can do it as an 1.5 inch offset as well, and that's just basically going to take that dimension and turn it into 1.5" offset. Now, why would you need 1.5" offset? Well, the reason that you might need 1.5" offset is you've got your pivot here, okay? You've got your door. When your door gets to the 90-degree position, that's all fine and dandy. But when your door gets out over here, pardon me, okay, you've got to make sure that you've got clearance here to here, whatever that might be. So you can take that to either 3/4 inch from here or 1.5" is what they're trying to illustrate with that. Available as 20-minute, that would be the maximum rating that you could get on that material. So it would become an E FM19 quantity of wires, hand, finish, etc. And then the U version, again, just going to give you a pair of 18-gauge wires. So be mindful of that. If you have an exit device that requires a large inrush, there are exit devices that require that, even though I believe those are all being phased out because they're going to motor-driven units. And, what I'm thinking they're saying is, regarding the always use M19 intermediate to install the door, generally leaves, with pivots, you're going to have all of your components separated, and you can't obviously separate, electrified intermediate pivots. Your door portions will be attached, your floor or jamb and header portions will be attached. So if you're going to hang the door that way, you'll need to use a non-electrified door if you're going to use the pivot in the intermediate pivot as part of actually installing or hanging the door. I don't see why there would be a problem in just getting it hung on the bottom pivot and then the top pivot, and then of course securing all of that, and then bringing your intermediate pivot separately and attaching it. I think that would work out fine. The next link below this video is to the installation instructions. Let's take a closer look at that. Okay, that closer look is as follows. Now, once upon a time, as I said initially, this document never existed. It was only the template, which we're going to look at the end, installation instructions. And in fact, I've never seen this document, except that I can understand what they're doing. They're using very large font. It's a single page, easy to read, not too much information really here that's not, in my opinion, already obvious or will become obvious through the process. Prepare door and frame instructions per the template. Door must be hung before the pivot is installed. The EML19 pivot cannot take the downward load of the door. The door weight must be carried by a floor closer, bottom pivot, or additional EML19 side jamb pivots. I would think that that's a typo. I would think they mean to say they're just ML19. You wouldn't have multiple power transfers on a door. I don't know what would cause you to need more than one. Alignment. To ensure proper installation, the center line of the side jamb pivot must be in line with the center line of the top and bottom pivots. That plumb line needs to be absolute. Okay. Now, what's interesting about Rixson is they have a couple of tools for this. And I'm going to point you in that direction. And of course, I have forgotten what they call those. This will be worth the time, I hope. Spotter, I think it's called a spotter. Yeah, quick spotter, that's what it's called. Okay, so page 7 of our pivot section is where it should be. It's not. Oh, in the floor closer section, that's where it is. Forgive me. It's in the floor closer section on page 7, so let's get back to that. And we do sell these with certain frequency, enough to where they're generally kept in stock. Yeah, the trouble is with our PDF, it stops on page 3, so there is no page 7, but now we know the part number of one of the 3 quick spotters that they manufacture, so we can go right to our website and pull that up. So they've got a quick spotter for the body. That's actually not what I'm looking for. And it did take me a moment to recall what the part number was. I call it a closer alignment or pivot closer alignment tool. And this is it here, 2604 or the 2608. The other one might be the 2608. Yeah, it is. So depending on the top pivot that you're using, you'll use the 2604 or the 2608. And that's what those are. Installation instructions. Will install into the header portion of the top pivot. Is how that's going to work. And they don't declare what top pivots this is used for, but if it's not the H340 or the H345, you'll be using the 2604. There's a video here that I have of that, but in the installation instructions, you sure get the concept. You're going to screw that up into there, and you're going to drop your line and your plumb bob down. The plumb bob's not included. Just this fitting here is what you're going to end up getting. That's the way that you're going to ensure that you have a proper vertical axis of pivoting. You're going to need that to locate your bottom pivot, no doubt. And then when you mortise your intermediate pivot per the template, you'll be in alignment. Well, when you mortise everything. They cannot be, okay, so these leaves cannot be separated, and that's how that works. Open door and connect wires to the jamb portion in the frame. Push the wires back into the frame. Install those jamb screws and then do the same to the door. So frame step, door step. Test your electrical connection, obviously. Current rating, 2 amp continuous. Super. Now, the last document is the template, and the template is really a technical drawing of the item, but when you observe where everything is to be prepped, to be drilled and prepped, and what they're showing here is these are the holes that you'll need to drill, but that will be detailed when we look at the leaf. This is clearly showing the reinforcement in the frame and the reinforcement in the door. So this hatched line is just the frame reinforcement. Your hinge, your pivot leaf is here. Okay. So you have your height, you have your width at the bottom of each, the top of your jamb portion, the top of your door leaf, but that's going to be 1.25 inches. But you're going to have to breach through the door, pardon me, the edge of the door here and then down here on the frame. Okay, so you're going to have the positioning of where you will drill the hole for the door and the frame for those wires to pass through, which is going to mate up with where they're coming out of the back of the leaf itself. And you know, you have to make sure that you are getting that first preparation at 1/4 inch. You know, from the high edge of the door. That's got to be 1/4 inch. And as we study this document further, they're giving us 1/4 inch dimension from the face of from the high edge of the door. Well, from the face of the door to that prep, but they're not telling us where to locate that on the frame. And I think the reason is because, you know, this drawing is certainly inferring that you have an inset application of your door. Your door is set into the frame slightly. You could also be installing this in a flush application, so I think they're declining to define that because then they would need to define every inset, 1/8 of an inch, 3/32, or flush, whatever the case might be. So they're giving you that 1/4 inch dimension there. They're not giving you any centerline dimension, so you'll need to reference the top of the pivot from either the top of the door or the underside of the header. And when you're taking that dimension, you'll need to account for the margin from the top of the door to the underside of the header when you're transposing those dimensions. So if you had, let's say if you had 37 inch, just using a random number, top of the door to the top of the pivot, you're going to have 37 1/8 if you measure that from the underside of the header to the top of the pivot prep. If it's 1/8 of an inch margin at the top, which it would be. Now, speaking of 1/8 of an inch margin, you need to have that between the face of the door and the face of the stop, and they need this to be radiused over. What you'll find is most people don't treat the edge of the door like this, so that when the door opens and moves out, that hard outside corner hits here. That over time not only damages the door, but weakens the installation of the hardware, especially at the bottom of the door where the door arm is connected, because you're torquing the door out because it's making contact with the face of the frame. It serves to work everything loose, and because that weight is being borne by the bottom arm, that's where I see the failure. So, little known fact, that has to be relieved there. You can chamfer it, but you just need to create clearance so that will not hit the frame. And if it's left standard, it's going to be so close to hitting the frame that it will probably make a breath's amount of contact, but you need to allow for expansion, thermal expansion, movement of the frame, whatever the case is. So this is really important that that is done. Other than that, there's not much else to mention here except that they want 11/16 hole for your wire transfer. Okay. Now, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page here. Okay, that will allow you to review not only all of the Rixson products that we sell by means of this horizontal navigation, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. Okay, speaking of the full product catalog, we have some older catalogs. I've got a book from 2010 here. I have one from 1920 here. If you want to see what Rixson was making 100 years ago, there's the book in order to do so. Neat little trip in history, that's for sure. And if you deal in the door hardware industry at all, or especially as a locksmith or someone who's a door tech, and you're in an older urban area, your Chicago's, your New York's, you are going to see material installed that is literally from this vintage. And that's why this catalog is so helpful. Our record of one, let me back up, one service that we perform is repairing, rebuilding old closers. Our record is a closer from 1904, a Rixson closer, having repaired that. Neat stuff in this catalog, as you can see. Really handy when you're doing some research. Okay, let's wrap up this video on camera. Okay, in conclusion, extremely nice quality product. The name Rixson is synonymous with pivots, and I would think is the name most synonymous with them. I wouldn't mind if they put their logo on here, something nice, small, and petite. I would expect to see that on a Rixson product. The name Rixson is not only known for pivots, they're of course also known for floor closers, which is the other primary product line that you will see Rixson associated with. Intermediate pivots and of course top pivots go along with floor closers. Although I understand from people in Canada that you don't see them there hardly ever, and in their logic for assuming that is because of the cold weather, and that the Rixson floor closers don't operate very well in cold weather. You know, I've seen floor closers installed in Chicago and for decades, and Chicago gets kind of cold too, so I'm not really, you know, it could be a marketing thing. Although I think it might be the opinion of people who specify hardware that you wouldn't want your fluid in that sort of sub-zero temperature application. And to that I certainly couldn't agree. I'd want to speak with the factory at length before I made a final determination whether or not to specify floor closers for exterior applications. But I can think of many, many instances where I've seen them. Obviously handed, different finishes, your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your satin, your polished. You're going to be able to do this in powder-coated finishes. Black is very popular nowadays in the year 2010, which is just a throwback to it being a popular finish 100 years ago. I think black was the standard finish, the one that you would just, if you didn't want to pay any more money and you wanted the cheapest finish, it would be black. They've brought black, and what's funny, black has a upcharge generally. If there's an upcharge on a finish, black may be included in that. Any questions on the E ML19 with a 4-wire or any other Rixson product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. If you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please click subscribe as well, and even share the video with someone that you know. And if you have any questions for a future video, please send them our way and we will make every attempt to oblige. And thank you very much.